Modern Queen Tales presents The Ice Taketh All Back. Part 1. The Betrayal and the Bitter Descent. The iron gates of Cryonax slammed shut, locking me out in the howling white. The sound echoed off the high stone walls of the capital, a final, metallic judgment. I stood in the knee-deep snow of the Northern Barrens, wearing nothing but a thin linen tunic and leather trousers. Lord Regent Verdun stood on the battlements above, wrapped in his heavy bear fur cloak. He held my golden commander's insignia in his gloved hand. He crushed the metal star and tossed it over the edge. It landed softly in the snow at my bare feet. Treason carries the sentence of exile, Camille Hart, Verdun declared. His voice carried over the screaming wind, magically amplified by the court sorcerers at his side. The tundra claims the traitors. May the ice strip your bones. Verdun orchestrated the false charges. He poisoned the old king, forged the letters bearing my seal, and slaughtered my loyal lieutenants in their sleep. I saw the ambition in his eyes months ago. I underestimated his cruelty. The guards turned on me at midnight, dragging me from my quarters before I could draw my blade. Now, I faced the frozen expanse of the deep north, a guaranteed death sentence. I looked up at Verdun. I memorized the smug curve of his lips, the sharp angle of his jaw, the heavy gold crown resting on his brow. I etched his face into my mind. I turned my back to the gates and walked into the blizzard. The cold seized my body instantly. The wind felt like a barrage of physical blows, driving shards of ice into my bare arms and face. Every breath burned my lungs. The temperature sapped the heat from my blood, turning my extremities numb within minutes. I pushed my legs forward, breaking through the crust of the snow, dragging my knees high with every step. The landscape offered nothing but white. Jagged peaks of black rock jutted up through the permafrost in the distance, obscured by the driving snow. No trees grew here, no animals moved. The Northern Barrens swallowed everything. I walked for hours. The numbness spread from my fingers and toes into my arms and legs. My heart beat slowly, a sluggish drum in my chest. My vision narrowed to a small, dark tunnel. My knees buckled. I pitched forward, face first, into a snowbank. The snow tasted like dust and iron. The cold whispered a seductive promise of sleep. Closing my eyes felt like the easiest choice in the world. The pain would stop. The betrayal would fade. Then, Verdun's smug smile flashed behind my eyelids. A hard, violent spark ignited in my chest. Anger surged through my veins, hot and metallic. Verdun wanted me to die quietly. He wanted the tundra to do his dirty work, to erase Camille Hart from the history of Cryonax. I slammed my frozen fist into the snow. I pushed myself up onto my hands and knees. The muscles in my arms screamed, tearing against the rigid cold. I forced my feet beneath me and stood. I would not give Verdun the satisfaction of my death. I would survive this wasteland. I would turn this frozen hell into my weapon, and I would drive it straight through Verdun's heart. Part 2. First embers of a frozen refuge. I dragged myself toward the jagged black rocks I saw earlier. The wind roared, attempting to push me back. I leaned into the gale, using my anger as a physical shield. The rocks formed a narrow ravine, sheltering the base of a towering cliff from the worst of the wind. I collapsed against the stone. The rock felt slightly warmer than the air. A faint, sulfuric scent drifted up from a crack in the ground. Heat. I dropped to my knees and clawed at the packed snow and ice covering the fissure. My fingernails cracked and bled, leaving red smears on the white ground. I dug until my hands struck loose gravel. A thin wisp of steam curled upward, warming my face. A geothermal vent? I grabbed a sharp, loose piece of slate, I hacked at the permafrost around the vent, expanding the opening. I carved a shallow trench into the ice wall behind the vent, creating a small, insulated hollow. The ambient heat from the earth trapped inside the ice cave raised the temperature just enough to stop my shivering. I spent the next 2 days expanding my cave. I used the slate to carve blocks of ice, stacking them to enclose the front of the shelter, leaving a small gap for the steam to vent and a low tunnel for access. I drank melted snow. I scavenged patches of pale, tough lichen clinging to the rocks near the vent. I chewed the bitter plant, forcing my stomach to accept the meager sustenance. On the 3rd day, the storm broke. The sky cleared to a piercing, brilliant blue. I ventured out of my cave to scout the ravine. 3 bodies lay huddled beneath an overhang a mile down the gorge. They wore the tattered rags of Cryonac's prisoners. 2 men and 1 woman. I approached them quietly. They breathed, but barely. Their skin held a bluish tint. I grabbed the nearest man by the shoulders and shook him. "Wake up!" His eyes fluttered open. He looked at me through a haze of hypothermia. He was old, his face mapped with deep scars. "Death?" he croaked. "No," I said. "Survival. Get up." I dragged him to his feet. I kicked the other 2 awake. I forced them to walk, pushing them through the snow back to my geothermal cave. I shoved them inside the small ice shelter. The trapped heat immediately began to thaw their frozen limbs. The old man introduced himself as Galahad. The younger man was Frank, and the woman, gripping a broken spear shaft, was Maria. Verdun exiled them a week before me for petty crimes and insubordination. "We are dead," Frank whispered, shivering violently. "There is nothing out here." "There is heat," I said, pointing to the vent. "There is ice. There is stone. That is everything we need." I took command. They lacked the energy to argue, and my utter refusal to die gave them a focal point. I assigned tasks. Maria gathered lichen. Frank chipped away at the ice, expanding the cave system along the fissure line. Galahad used his knowledge of the rocks to find flint and create a spark. We fed the spark with dried moss found deep in the crevices. We built our first fire. The flames illuminated the smooth, carved walls of our ice cave. The golden light reflected in the eyes of my new companions. The despair in their faces cracked, replaced by a fragile, terrifying hope. "The cold is not our enemy," I told them, staring into the fire. "The cold is our wall. Cryonax believes nothing can survive here. They will never look for us. The tundra is our shield." Part 3. Architects of an Invisible Empire. Months bled into years. The Northern Barrens demanded absolute perfection, and we delivered. Our single cave grew into a subterranean labyrinth. We followed the network of geothermal vents deep into the crust of the earth. We hollowed out massive caverns beneath the ice shelf. Maria proved to be a brilliant engineer. She designed structural arches of compressed snow and ice that hardened into materials stronger than Cryonax stone. We harnessed the steam from the vents, channeling it through hollowed stone pipes to heat the living quarters and melt the ice for fresh drinking water. We were no longer 4 starving outcasts. Verdun's purges in the south sent a steady stream of exiles into the wastes. My scouts found them. I organized a specialized team led by a young, fiercely loyal tracker named Tristan. Tristan arrived in the tundra half dead, bearing the brand of a rebel on his cheek. I pulled him from the snow myself. "Now," he commanded the white cloaks. We crafted camouflage from the pelts of the massive snowstalker cats we learned to hunt. The scouts moved over the snow without making a sound, blending perfectly with the blizzards. They patrolled the borders of our territory, rescuing exiles before the cold took them. and bringing them down into the hidden city. We called our home Glacia. Glacia hummed with industry. We cultivated subterranean fungal gardens in the humid caves near the hottest vents, providing a stable food source. We forged tools and weapons from the dense, black iron ore we mined from the deep tunnels. The population swelled to 3,000 souls. Blacksmiths, soldiers, farmers, and scholars all discarded by Verdun, all unified by my vision. I established the foundational laws of the hidden empire. Silence above ground was paramount. We engineered our ventilation shafts to disperse the heat and smoke across miles of jagged rock, ensuring no single plume ever rose into the sky. Cryonax patrols occasionally ventured into the fringes of the wastes. They saw nothing but empty, hostile ice. They never suspected a thriving city lay directly beneath their boots. I walked through the grand concourse of Glacia. The walls, carved from pure blue glacial ice, glowed with the light of 1,000 oil lanterns. Water cascaded down a central channel, turning water wheels that powered our bellows and grinding stones. The air smelled of forged iron, roasting meat, and clean snow. Tristan jogged up to me, falling into step at my side. He wore his white snowstalker cloak over hardened leather armor. "Commander," Tristan said, handing me a rolled parchment, "the Southern scouts returned. Verdun is failing." I unrolled the map. It detailed the southern provinces of Cryonax. Red markers indicated famine and rebellion. "His taxes drained the outer villages," Tristan reported. "The army is stretched thin, putting down riots. He believes he is untouchable in the capital, but the foundation is rotting." I traced my finger over the capital city on the map. Verdun thought he threw me away into the dark. He unknowingly gave me an army of the most resilient, hardened people on the continent. He gave me the time and isolation to forge a weapon he could never comprehend. "It is time to prepare," I said. "Gather the captains." Part 4. The Cold Forge of Vengeance. We transformed the deepest caverns of Glacia into a war room and a training ground. The people of Glacia needed no motivation to fight. Verdun's cruelty united them. My task was channeling their rage into disciplined, lethal force. I stood on a balcony of black rock overlooking the main training floor. 1,000 soldiers moved in perfect unison below me. They wore armor crafted from overlapping plates of hardened black ice and iron. They moved silently. "They are ready, Sovereign," Galahad said, stepping up beside me. He wore the insignia of my top general. "They need to be faster," I replied. "Verdun relies on heavy cavalry and shield walls. We will fight in the whiteout. We will be ghosts." I instituted the Storm Hunters. My militia trained exclusively in the harshest conditions the tundra offered. We marched them into the teeth of Category 5 gales. They learned to communicate through physical tethers and sharp, percussive clicks that cut through the wind. They fought blindfolded to simulate the zero visibility of a snowstorm. Our weaponry capitalized on the environment. Maria's engineers developed thermal bombs, hollow spheres of iron packed with volatile sulfur dust from the deep vents, ignited by friction fuses. They detonated with enough heat to melt plate armor and shatter stone. We crafted throwing spears with glass-like ice tips that splintered inside a wound, dropping a man instantly. We designed broad, flat snowshoes that allowed our troops to sprint across the deep drifts, while Verdun's heavy soldiers would sink to their waists. I received weekly intelligence reports from Tristan's spies. They infiltrated Cryonax's northern border towns, posing as fur trappers. Verdun grew paranoid. He executed his own counselors. The Cryonax treasury bled gold to pay mercenaries to keep the starving populace in line. His forces consolidated around the capital, leaving the northern approaches completely unguarded. He still believed the tundra was an impenetrable wall protecting his rear flank. I stood in the center of the war room, surrounded by my captains. A massive map of Cryonax carved from stone dominated the table. The winter solstice approaches, I said, placing a black iron marker on Cryonax's capital. The royal meteorologists predict a massive front moving south from the wastes, the biggest storm of the decade. Tristan smiled. A whiteout. Verdun soldiers will retreat to their barracks, I said. The wall guards will huddle around their braziers. Their visibility will drop to 0. They will not see us until we are inside their gates. I looked around the table at the faces of my leaders, Galahad, Maria, Tristan. They bore the scars of their exile, but their eyes held the fierce, unyielding strength of the glacier. We strike on the solstice, I ordered. We bring the tundra to Cryonax. Part 5. Rise of the Glacial Sovereignty. The march south took 7 days. 10,000 soldiers of the Glacial Sovereignty moved across the ice shelf. We traveled under the cover of the monstrous blizzard, a moving sea of white cloaks blending perfectly with the driving snow. The temperature plummeted to 30 below 0. My soldiers did not shiver. This was our element. We reached the high ridge overlooking the capital city of Cryonax at midnight on the solstice. The city lay below us, a dark, sprawling mass huddled against the storm. Few lights burned. The storm battered the city walls, howling with the fury of the north. Deploy the vanguard, I told Tristan. Tristan raised his hand and dropped it. The white cloaks descended the ridge on their snowshoes, gliding over the 10-foot drifts that paralyzed the city's defenses. We reached the massive iron gates, the same gates that slammed shut on me 5 years ago. Cryonax guards huddled in the gatehouse, completely blind to our approach. Maria's sappers planted the thermal bombs against the iron hinges and the heavy wooden crossbeams. I drew my sword. The blade, forged from dark tundra iron, absorbed the faint moonlight. Ignite, I commanded. The thermal bombs detonated with a deafening roar. Bright orange fire flashed through the whiteout. The intense heat shattered the frozen iron hinges instantly. The massive gates groaned and collapsed inward, crashing into the snow with the force of an earthquake. Advance! I shouted. The ghost militia poured into the city. We struck with absolute precision and overwhelming speed. Cryonax's mercenaries stumbled from their barracks, confused and freezing, struggling to don their heavy armor. My soldiers moved like shadows. Ice-tipped spears found the gaps in the enemy armor. We bypassed the residential districts completely, leaving the citizens unharmed. Our target was the royal keep at the center of the city. The defenders threw up a desperate shield wall on the steps of the keep. I signaled Maria. Her grenadiers hurled a volley of thermal bombs into the center of the formation. The explosions scattered the shield wall, sending men flying into the snow. I led the charge up the steps. My dark iron sword sheared through the weapons of Verdun's royal guard. The cold fueled my muscles. I felt no fatigue. I kicked open the heavy oak doors of the throne room. Lord Regent Verdun sat on the golden throne. He looked older, his face lined with paranoia and stress. He gripped the armrests tightly as the heavy doors slammed open. His personal guard drew their swords, but they froze as 100 of my elite troops flooded the room, surrounding them in a circle of deadly, dark iron. Verdun stared at me. He looked at my black ice armor, the crown of frost-forged iron on my head, and the army of ghosts standing behind me. Recognition slowly pierced his shock. "Camille?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Impossible. You are dead. The ice took you." "The ice embraced me," I said, my voice echoing off the marble pillars. I walked slowly up the aisle toward the throne. "You threw me to the wolves, Verdun. You didn't realize I would return leading the pack?" His guards dropped their weapons. They saw the inevitability of their defeat. Verdun stood up, his face pale. He drew a jewel-encrusted dagger from his belt, a pathetic, trembling gesture. I did not break stride. I stepped up to the dais, slapped the dagger from his hand with the flat of my blade, and grabbed him by the throat of his heavy bear fur cloak. I drove him back, slamming him hard against the golden throne. "You stole my life," I told him, looking directly into his terrified eyes. "You corrupted this empire. Your reign ends tonight." I stripped the heavy gold crown from his head. It felt cheap and meaningless in my hand. I tossed it onto the marble floor. It clattered loudly in the silent room. I handed Verdun to Tristan. "Lock him in the lowest dungeon. Let him feel the cold he condemned us to." Tristan dragged the screaming traitor away. I turned and faced the throne room. My commanders, my soldiers, my people stood at attention. We conquered the capital without a prolonged siege, minimizing casualties and proving our absolute dominance. The old empire of Cryonax died tonight, suffocated by its own corruption and crushed by the relentless power of the North. I stepped up onto the dais and turned to face my army. I did not sit on the golden throne. I stood beside it. "Cryonax has fallen," I declared, my voice ringing clear and strong. "From this night forward, this continent answers to the Glacial Sovereignty. We build a new empire. An empire of strength, of justice, and of unyielding resolve. We are the storm, and we have arrived." The ghost militia slammed their spears against the marble floor in unison. The sound rolled through the keep like thunder. I looked out over my hidden kingdom, now brought into the light. I turned an exile's death into an emperor's dawn. The tundra forged me, and now the world would feel the freeze. The end.
If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.